Welcome back to the show. While there are many discussions around what a good life might look like, things get kind of complicated when considering what a good death might look like. Our next guest explores this at length in her new book, The Inevitable: Dispatches on the Right to Die. Author and journalist Katie Engelhart joins us to discuss the state of physician-assisted death in this country. We'd love to welcome you, Katie, to The Social.
Thanks so much for having me.
Fascinating discussion. It became legal in 2016 for physician-assisted death right across this country. Just recently, there was a bill passed that actually expanded those who are able to access this service. So let's break down, as of today, who is actually able to seek the right to die with the help of a physician.
Right. So the criteria is very clear. Someone needs to be 18 years old. The patient needs to have mental capacity, so really understand at the time of her death what she's asking for and why she wants it. Most importantly, the patient needs to have an illness or a condition that is getting worse in an irreversible way and that is causing her to suffer unbearably. And importantly, it's really the patient herself who can define what unbearable suffering is. But as you said, the government recently expanded the criteria. So until very recently, a patient needed to be within a reasonable amount of time from a natural death. So we'd say the patient was 6 months or maybe 3 years from a natural death. But now that time constraint has gone away, which opens the door potentially to patients with kinds of chronic illnesses that wouldn't necessarily take that person's life imminently, but might in 10 or 20 years.
Well, the federal government recently passed a bill that would allow Canadians with certain mental illnesses to seek physician-assisted death. I mean, this is a really understandably contentious point for some. Many people have pushed back against this idea, suggesting that we should be more interested and more focused on helping people want to live rather than helping them die, essentially. So what are the risks that particularly people who've pushed back on this with this type of legislation?
Yeah, this is really thorny, and this will be opened up to Canadians, it looks like, in 2023. Critics warn that, by virtue of having a really serious mental illness, someone isn't able to think rationally or make decisions in her best interest. And they worry that doctors are sort of endorsing the despair of a patient who's considering suicide. And then there are other critics who have more practical concerns. They worry that the state of mental health care is just not good enough in Canada to allow this. That said, I think sometimes the lines we draw in these debates between physical illness and mental illness are a little artificial. I mean, already, someone might qualify for the law because she has breast cancer, but she might also have a 20-year history of severe depression. So sometimes these cases are a little muddier than we think.
When it comes to advocates who support the idea of those with mental illnesses seeking the right to die, it's already in practice. And I know you spent some time in Belgium, and that is where this practice has been legal for quite a while. What did you find there when you actually saw this in action?
Yeah, I think this was probably the most difficult part of my reporting. So I went to Belgium and I met patients who had qualified for euthanasia on the grounds of mental suffering. And, they were very clear that this is what they wanted and that they'd really tried everything they could to get better. On the other hand, some of the patients I met were women in their late 20s. And, I admit to sometimes feeling just, you're so young. Can we really say that you have no prospect of getting better? But again, this is, really complicated. There's a psychiatrist I spent a lot of time with in Toronto, Dr. Justine Dembo, and she makes the case that when it comes to physical illness, we're already at a place where we let people decide that enough is enough. And Dr. Dembo's case is that really we should make the same, allowances for people who have mental illnesses.
People don't only seek physician-assisted death when they're in the throes of pain or disease. They often also sometimes, do it in advance, thinking about where their disease might take them. I'm thinking of cases where dementia is part of the conversation. This is currently not legal in Canada to request physician-assisted death in advance, but polls have actually shown that Canadians, by and large, would support this right. So what might that law look like in practice?
There's sort of two models that can be used. So in Belgium right now, someone can qualify for a physician-assisted death when she's diagnosed with dementia. The trick is she has to have mental capacity, full mental capacity at the moment that she dies. And this means that effectively, she's going to have to choose to die when she's still in a really early stage of dementia. And the other model is what you just referenced. It's kind of an advanced directive, and that's what Canada was considering, and that exists in the Netherlands. So a patient there can say, you know, when I reach a certain moment when I don't recognize my husband anymore, when I stop being able to feed or bathe myself, I want a lethal injection from a physician. But that's really complicated too, because I mean, you could imagine a situation where someone has very severe dementia, it's her scheduled day to die, and she's smiling, she's playing outdoors, she seems to be enjoying a quality of life. And so in those cases, we're asking physicians to inject a patient, to end a patient's life who seems to be happy. Canada was considering the advanced directive model, but just recently the government turned down a recommendation from the Senate that be an option for Canadians.
So the eligibility in Canada is certainly broader than in other countries, but people's requests, as you've indicated, are still turned down. And when this happens, there are often people who seek out illegal alternatives. And you explore in this book something I've never heard of, which is this kind of underground euthanasia international system. So what are these groups being used for?
All around the world, men and women are planning their final hours in very specific ways, and sometimes in very organized ways. So I spent time with a group called the Final Exit Network in the United States. There are hundreds of volunteers across the country. They have retired doctors involved. They have their own eligibility criteria, which is much broader than the Canadian law and the American laws, certainly. And they will, in some cases, if they accept a person, if they decide that person meets their criteria, they will travel across the country and sit with that person and guide her through the dying process. So I was really shocked by these groups when I first came across them, but I actually think we shouldn't be surprised, because when people feel abandoned by the law or by medicine, they do find other ways.
You know, almost everybody you met said they would like and expressed that they would like to die with dignity. And you say that there was a phrase that time and time again kept coming up with different people. Can you share what that was and what insight that gave you?
And the phrase is, I would rather die like a dog. And that's very shocking. But in my reporting, I met a lot of people who told me about euthanizing sick pets, dogs and cats that they loved, but who got really sick and who they wanted to put out of their misery. And a lot of people said to me, why isn't there that option for human beings? And I mean, that's a really powerful statement, because if we think of a country like Canada, you know, we spend a lot of money per capita on healthcare. We pride ourselves on having, you know, a really good national healthcare system. And then I meet people who are asking for a veterinary solution, for an option that's available to animals.
So in the reporting of this book, you spoke with people about the hows and the whys, how they would end their lives. You also spoke to physicians. You even sat with people in their final hours. So I'm curious to know if this experience has changed your perspective on end of life or even death.
You know, in a weird way, I think I spent 5 years reporting this book, and I ended up feeling more uncertain about things than when I started. I think a lot of the conversation we have around end-of-life planning and the right to die is really simplistic. But in actuality, you know, these choices are really complicated. And sure, they involve a cancer or a heart disease, but they also involve all sorts of other things: family dynamics, money, mortgages, legacy, mental illnesses. You know, all sorts of things come together to influence these decisions. And so in my book, you know, I'm not a doctor, I'm not an activist, I don't have a bone to pick politically. I just really wanted to listen to people and to tell their stories and all of that complexity.
Wow. Just unbelievable insights. We thank you so much for writing this book and for joining us to talk about it today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
The book is called The Inevitable, and you can find it everywhere now. We do want to say to you, if you or someone you know has coped with thoughts of suicide, you can call Canada's Suicide Prevention Service at 1-833-456-4566. We'll be right back.